week, like last week, there was a lot of news about Prince Harry and Meghan. So I was watching some clips of the interview that they did. And at one point, they said that they were helpless and did not know what to do. And that struck with me for someone who's from a royal family, who's staying in a palace, and for them to say that they were helpless and didn't know what to do is very surprising. So generally, we would think that somebody who's staying in a palace would be having a perfect life and everything is taken care of. But for them to say they were helpless is very telling. And so they needed some kind of help, and unfortunately, they were not able to get it, and they didn't know what to do. And I was looking at our own lives, and we also go through situations of helplessness in our life. We reach crossroads in our life when we're not really sure what to do, whether to turn left or whether to turn right or to go back. And oftentimes, even in our life, there seems to be no clear path going forward. So it could be in our jobs, it could be in our marriages, it could be in our personal life, it could even be in our church ministry. And if we continue in that state of helplessness, it can quickly change to desperation, and finally, it would lead to depression. And in some cases, as we have seen, even in this country and everywhere else, it could also lead to death, where people take their life. But as believers, we don't have to say what Prince and Meghan said, which is, I don't know what to do. While we also go through the same situation of helplessness, we know where to go for help. We know where to go for hope. So God is our help in times of need, and God is our hope in times of distress. So we go to Him in prayer for help. And when we finish our prayer, our hearts are filled with hope because we have committed our requests, we have committed our burdens, we have committed our crisis to the Lord. So we walk away from the time of prayer with hope in our hearts. And that is the prayer, power of prayer. And God has designed us to be incomplete without Him, so that we can depend upon Him for help and also for hope. So the feeling of being helpless or being hopeless, I feel is a good sign for a healthy believer. As believers, we should always feel that we are helpless and we are hopeless, because it is those situations that will take us to the Lord in prayer. And that is a healthy sign. And the Lord always wants us to come to Him when we are looking for help, and when we are looking for hope, and we are looking for strength. And we often read from Philippians chapter 4 and verse 6, where it says, be careful for nothing, which means we should not feel helpless, but in everything, which is whether we have a small worry or a big worry, or all kinds of worries and situations that we go through, we need to bring it to the Lord by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. Let your requests be made known unto God. So Paul is saying is that we approach God with confidence and with thanks, believing that our prayers will be heard and our prayers will be answered. And when we approach prayer with that attitude and with that confidence, Paul goes on to say that you will enjoy the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, and it shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ. So what we saw in the life of Prince Harry and Meghan was that they were not able to reach that point of peace. They were going through a season of helplessness, a season of hopelessness, but since they were not able to rely on God, they were not able to reach that point of peace. So I feel that as believers, we are in a much better position because of what the Lord has done for us. And we see that when Jesus walked on this earth, He was always ministering help he was always ministering hope. So there are many people who came to him looking for some kind of help. And we see that he never turned away anyone. He was always compassionate, and he was able to give help and hope in times of need. So our help and hope comes from God. And we'll just read a short passage from Luke chapter 18, verse 35 to 43. Luke chapter 18, verse 35 to 43, and see what lessons we can learn about prayer. So this is a passage about a blind man getting healed. And there are some lessons on prayer that we can learn from this incident. Yeah, maybe someone can read Luke 18, 35 to 43.
I will read them.
Yes, brother.
And it came to pass that as he was come nigh unto Jericho, a certain blind man sat by the wayside begging. And hearing the multitude pass by, he asked what it meant. And they told him that Jesus of Nazareth passeth by. And he cried, saying, Jesus, thou son of David, have mercy on me. And they which went before rebuked him that he should hold his peace. But he cried so much the more, Thou son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stood and commanded him to be brought unto him. And when he was come near, he asked him, saying, What wilt thou that shall I do unto thee? And he said, Lord, that I may receive my sight. And Jesus said unto him, Receive thy sight, thy faith hath saved thee. And immediately he received his sight and followed him, glorifying God. And all the people, when they saw it, gave praise unto God.
Okay, so here we read about a blind man, and he is sitting by the wayside and begging, which is a condition of helplessness and hopelessness. But we see that his situation is changed, and there are some lessons that we can learn even from this experience about prayer. And there are 5 thoughts that I want to share. The first one is we see that his prayer begins with an inquiry. So he sees that there is some, there are lots of multitudes, and he hears some noise, and he wants to know who it is. So in the same way, when we are coming to prayer, we should know who's the God that we are coming to pray to. And we know that our God is the creator of all things. He is the sustainer of all things, and he also controls all things. And that is what we learned even in Colossians. So we should come with a clear understanding of who it is that we are approaching. So the blind man asks, who is it? And they tell him it is Jesus of Nazareth. So it is safe to assume that the blind man had heard some stories about Lord Jesus Christ performing miracles. So he wants to make sure that before he gives his request, that he is making it to the right person. So he doesn't want to waste his time making prayers to an idol or making prayers to a person, because they really cannot answer the prayers or come up with solutions. So in the same way, when we are coming to our time of prayer, we know that we are coming to God who is able to do miracles. We are coming to a God who is able to solve our problems. And we are coming to a God who is able to lead us and guide us. And secondly, we see that his prayer is persistent. As we read in verse 38 and 39, he cried, saying, Thou son of David, have mercy on him. And they rebuked him that he should hold his peace, but he cried so much the more. So they tried to quiet him down, but we see that the blind man does not give up. In fact, his prayers become even more intense. In the same way, we go through situations in life where we want to give up on our prayers. So we don't have crowds telling us not to pray, but it could simply be circumstances that tell us there is no need to pray. There is really no solution to this problem. But the blind man teaches us that we need to persist in our prayer, even when there is opposition from our own heart, our own spirit, or maybe even from our own families, there might be opposition where people may think we are crazy to even pray about these things. So our friends, they may think we are crazy to pray to God about immigration issues, or finding a spouse, or finding a job, finding a house, or finding comfort when we are going through sorrows. So they may think that even if there is a God, God doesn't have time to go to immigration office and fight our battles. But we know that our God cares about each one of us. He cares about the smallest problems that we have. And it is that knowledge that God knows us intimately, and He knows the smallest problems that we have. It gives us the faith to persist in our prayers. So we don't give up on the small prayer needs that we have, because we know that God cares even about the smallest prayer needs that we have. So Psalm 46 and verse 1, Psalm 46:1 says, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in time of trouble. And Bible tells us that God is aware even of the very hairs on our head. So that is the extent of His care for us. So there is no reason for us not to persist in our prayers, no matter others may try to discourage us, or the circumstances may tell us that there is no hope. But we need to persist in our prayer till we hear from God, whether it's a yes or a no, or whatever the answer is. We need to continue to persist in our prayers. And we keep looking at the Lord, because He is the source of our help. And He is the one who's going to do miracles. And He's the one who's going to take us from that situation of helplessness and hopelessness. So our God is truly a wonder-working God. So that's the second thing that we learned. The first one is that His prayer begins by knowing who God is. And secondly, His prayer is persistent. And thirdly, we see that His prayer is very direct. When Jesus asks Him in verse 41, what should I do, or what do you want? He says simply that I may receive my sight. So He doesn't beat around the bush. He doesn't give a history of how He became blind and what are all the challenges that He has had all these years. He simply comes to the point, which is that He is blind and He wants to receive His sight. And of course, the Lord knows everything about us. The Lord knows the history. The Lord knows the challenges that we are facing in our life. And the Lord wants us to simply come to Him in faith with direct requests. And when we do that, when we are transparent in our prayers, and when we are direct, it is even more effective. And we also see in Matthew chapter 6, when the Lord teaches His disciples how to pray, He doesn't go into a long prayer. It is a very short prayer, about 60 words or something. And the prayer is very effective. And the fourth thing that we learn is that His prayer is offered in faith. And that is what Lord Jesus Christ recognizes in verse 42. When it says, receive your sight, He goes on to say, thy faith has saved thee. And that is what we saw earlier when He persisted in reaching out to Jesus to have mercy on him. That showed that he had faith in Lord, that He could do miracles. And here in verse 42, the Lord is recognizing that you're going to receive your sight because your faith has saved thee. And in other section in the scriptures, it says, be it unto you according to your faith. And when we look back on our lives, we often see that the Lord rewards us for our faith. And the more we push our faith, we also see that the Lord does greater and greater miracles in our life. And when we hold back on our faith, we also see that the Lord also holds back on the blessings that He wants to give us. And going back to this blind man, had he been quiet and had he simply backed out because people were telling him to be quiet, he would have lost the opportunity to receive the blessing. But we see that he persisted in his call because he had faith that Jesus could do a miracle. So no matter what challenges we may be facing in life, it could be a small one or a big one, but when we persist in prayer and when we show the Lord that we have faith that he can intervene in that situation and he can bring about a resolution, we would see that the Lord will honor our faith and he will answer us. And that is what we also read in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 6. Yeah, someone can read where it says, without faith, it is impossible to please God. Hebrews 11 and verse 6.
And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him.
Yes. Okay, so we need to believe that God exists, and when we do that, he rewards us. And the blind man believed that Jesus Christ exists. He believed that Jesus had the power to bring about healing, and that is what gave him the confidence, and that is what gave him the motivation to persist in prayer. So even as we are gathered this morning, if we don't have that faith, then it will not give us the motivation to go to the Lord in prayer. If we don't have the faith of a blind man, even in our own personal life, when we have problems, we will try to come up with a solution on our own instead of turning to God. And the fifth thing that we learn is that finally that his life has changed. He not only receives eyesight, but we also see that he becomes a worshiper and he also becomes a witness for the Lord. So we see that his blindness leads to much greater blessings. He's not only able to receive his sight, but he also becomes a worshiper. And because of his life, we see that God gets the glory, and also it becomes a witness, as we see in verse 43. All the people, when they saw it, they gave praise unto God. So this teaches us that we might have our battles that we fight privately in prayer, but when God answers our prayers, everyone sees it and everyone is lifted up and everyone's faith is increased. And even if you just go back to the engagement of Brother Rohit and Sister Amni, maybe they were praying for a long time for a spouse privately. Maybe they went through seasons where they felt hopeless or helpless, that their marriage is not happening. But when it happened, it was a public event. It was a public witness, and all of us were able to see it. All of us were able to rejoice, and the glory went to God. So that's something we can learn, that our prayers don't have to be done publicly, but it even says in Matthew that you pray privately and the Lord will answer it openly. And when the Lord answers it openly, his goal is that he may get the glory and people would be strengthened in their faith and it would be a witness. And that is why we always say to share testimony in church, because you might have been praying for something for a long time. And when the Lord answers your prayer, you want to give the glory back to God and also be a witness for him so that others may be encouraged. So this morning, it is quite possible that some of us here may be going through situations where we feel we are helpless and hopeless, but the Lord is encouraging us that we should expect those seasons in our life where we feel helpless and hopeless. And God's desire is that we should, he wants to bring us into communion with him. He wants us to seek him earnestly, and he will fulfill his eternal plans for each one of us, and he will get the glory. So those are the 5 lessons. We see that the blind man begins by inquiring who Jesus is, or whether it is Jesus to whom he is going to put his request. And secondly, we saw that his prayer is persistent. And thirdly, his prayer is direct. And fourthly, he offers his prayer in faith. And finally, we see that God does his work in response to his prayer by blessing him not only for his request, but also blessing him with more than what he had asked for. And that is our expectation this morning, that we may not know how to pray, but we pray in the Spirit, and the Lord will lead us and guide us. And we come in faith, knowing that the Lord is hearing our prayers and he'll answer it in a way so that he will get the glory. Yes, brother.